it happened so quickly. And I do remember feeling that I was warm. Suddenly I felt nice and warm because I felt like when we walked into that operating room, it felt cold. They took me to see a place that was like a school. People were wandering around, kind of like a campus or something, and they could listen to talks and teachers.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Soul Inspired. Today I have yet another inspiring story. It's of Debora Christy Love, and she is a near-death experiencer, but she's also a spiritual intuitive guide. And we're going to be chatting with her today about how her experience shaped her life and the things that she's doing now. So first of all, thank you so much, Debora, for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
The first thing I really dive into, and you may have been asked this before, based on if we just stick first of all with your near-death experience, so your first that main experience that you had, I believe you said you were young, but what was, it's hard to remember probably this, but what was your
Mhm.
life before that experience? Were you just, did you have a typical childhood, or what was your life like?
I think it probably was back for, the early 60s, early to mid 60s. Yeah, it was pretty normal, I would say, for that
Okay.
era.
And did you grow up
Yeah.
in a spiritual religious type home, or was it uh,
Well, it was one of those families that I was raised Catholic. Um, we went to church sometimes in spells, other times not so much, but that was always the undertone. I went to Catholic school, and I never enjoyed it a whole lot. It always seemed really foreign to me. It just seemed too rigid, and um, yeah, I mean that's just how it was. You had to go and sit still and not, try and listen to stuff you didn't understand, and it was kind of boring. And
right, right.
that was my take on it all before my near death experience.
Okay. And how old were you when you had the near death experience?
I was just about to turn four
Okay.
years old.
So
Yeah.
even your memory of your religious background is kind of probably, I mean, I can't remember much before my fourth birthday. I can remember a little bit, but I kind of have an idea who I was and where I was and where I lived and the things I did. Like I
Yeah.
didn't really
Yeah.
attend much church, a little bit, but not a ton. But it sounds like it wasn't anything too extreme, that you were in
No,
church a lot or
not
anything
really.
like that. Okay.
No, it was, just Sundays or a few couple Sundays a month or whatever. I just remember, the fact to dress nice and don't get dirty.
Right.
Mind your, all the stuff you couldn't just play and have fun like a normal day.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So with the experience you had, what happened? So can you lead us up to the day it happened? Like what exactly was going on and
Oh,
why
for
did you have
sure.
this experience?
Well, it came about when I was told I needed to have my tonsils out, and I didn't even really know what that meant. I had to kind of ask, but I knew from my mom's reaction she wasn't, really excited for me to have to go through it, but yet she was going to let it happen anyway. So I kind of gave up. I figured, well, this apparently is happening whether I want it or not, you know. And so I ended up going to the hospital, and um, it was funny because I remember being in the waiting room, and then the doctor actually came out, and my dad actually just handed me over to him, which seemed a little odd because this is kind of a stranger. And he actually carried me into the operating room. And then he kind of tricked me, and he said, well, he said, it seems like your nose is a little runny. I'm just going to get you a hanky. And I was like, but my nose isn't runny. It wasn't at the time. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then he went over. He was still holding on to me in his one arm, and he opened the cupboard and he got this kind of hanky out, and he got this bottle and he put stuff on it, and then he puts it over my face and started holding it, and it smelled terrible. And I remember thinking, you tricked me. You're being mean. Like this isn't what's
Hmm.
supposed to happen. I don't think. So he put
Right.
me on the table, and when we got to that room, there were other people in the room. So they seemed like they were waiting for us. And they put me down on like the operating table. That's when he started pushing harder. And I was kicking and screaming and I was yelling. And I really was convinced that he was trying to kill me because I couldn't
Wow.
hardly breathe. And when he pushed harder, then I really couldn't breathe except this horrible stuff on the hanky because I had no choice. And then I remembered seeing bursts of light. I started seeing like colors, like fireworks. They look like yellow and red and blue. So that kind of just stopped me in my kicking and screaming. And I was just watching this. And next thing I know, I was going through this giant white tunnel. It was brilliant bright white and it seemed really long. And but I could see and feel the light at the end of the tunnel was so bright. But the biggest thing was that I felt it very strongly pulling me. And it was like I wanted to go there more than I ever wanted anything in my life. It's like, and the more I realized that the more I thought about how much I want to go there, it seemed like I would go faster through this tunnel. And then I just kind of landed there in the light. And it was really just the most beautiful feeling. I just remember feeling, even though I was really young, I remember feeling almost like naked in a way, like this light source. I call this divine source because it's not really like being, but it was just the light itself. But it was consciousness. This light communicated in feeling and everything, and it was tremendous energy. And I felt like this being or light knows absolutely every detail of my entire existence. There was nothing could be hidden from this light. But there was so much love in that light that I knew that it didn't matter who stood there or what they could have possibly ever done, that you deserve to be in this light. There was nothing that could prevent you from being this light because you're actually part of this light. And it was a really comforting feeling to go, well, it doesn't matter what you've ever done because it just doesn't matter because there's so much love here. It just kind of erases everything. And it was a really wonderful feeling. And I felt like, oh, I'm home. This is home. This is where I want to be. This is the greatest thing in the world is being here. So
Okay, so to recap so far, you go in for this routine for your tonsils. They put something over you so that, I mean, obviously you're to breathe this chemical or whatever it was
yeah,
to
like chloroform or
the
whatever
chlorif.
they used. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they
Yeah.
really didn't do it in a a kind a kind manner, but I mean, it is what it is, I guess. So you're given this and you go through almost like a fear state for a while because you're now thinking, am I being killed? Like what's happening here?
I really
Um,
thought he was trying to kill me.
I can see why,
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like you were really
Yes.
given much info, but I guess at age 4, I can also understand how it got to that point. Maybe your parents didn't want you to get scared, or I don't know the whole story, but
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
seemed like it was going in that weird direction. But then all of a sudden you start noticing this change. You're seeing lights, then you're in the tunnel. So there was no leaving the body, it sounds like right away. You just were immediately in
It
this
was very
tunnel.
like instantaneous. It happened so quickly. And I do remember feeling that I was warm. Suddenly I felt nice and warm because I felt like when we walked into that operating room, it felt cold. It felt like
Mm-hmm.
there was a little bit cold. I was always been really sensitive to cold.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got there, it was just the perfect temperature. It was nice and warm again. So I did notice that difference too when I got there. After that, I really started feeling like there were beings around me, and they were mostly light beings. So I wasn't seeing like details of faces or anything, but I felt and knew they were like angels and guides. And we just were like telepathically communicating. And there was a point where I actually started seeing a bunch of flashes like memories. And it was like watching a movie going really fast by my vision. And but I was feeling it all so much. And I remember at one point asking in my head, who am I? Because I was feeling like I was all those people. And the answer that came to me loud and clear was, you are all of them. And I was like, oh, well, I guess that makes sense because that's what it felt like. It felt like I was all of the people I was seeing. So, yeah, I just, okay, that sounds right. um, so it was very jarring, to think, well, okay, I'm all of them. That I guess that makes sense because it felt like that's what was happening. Um, then I felt they were telling me, one of them said, like, I'm not sure why you're here yet, why you're here now, and I'm going to go and see what we should do, what we should do. I'm not sure, because I just landed there so quickly, maybe before I was supposed to. And she went and came back quickly, and it was like, well, I'm going to give you a tour, and we'll let you know more later, kind of thing. And I really was oblivious, really, to what she was talking about. It was just I was in this good place, and I was home, and I didn't want to go anywhere. But they showed me a garden. I saw a garden a with a bunch of beautiful flowers, and there was a flower that was really tall, a great big sunflower. And as I got near it, it looked like it was kind of dancing. And then I heard communication. It was like, "Hello, how are you?" And I remember going like, "They're alive here, like they're talking to me in my head."
Wow.
She said, "Well, everything's energy, everything is alive. You want to remember that," she said. Everything is alive, everything's energy. And I saw this beautiful waterfall, and it was falling into this pond, and there was a water drop that kind of jumped out, and I heard the water drop say hello to me, and then it went into the pond. And I remember thinking, oh, like I said hi back, and then it was gone, and I kind of for an instant thought, oh, it's gone now. And then I heard the voice come up from the pond and say, but I'm not really gone, I'm just in with the rest. And
Oh,
that
wow.
that kind of metaphor has come back to me over and over, because in my lifetimes at different points, because it really explains how we can all be one, but you don't lose your identity. You're always you, because there is only one. And people think, well, do I get lost in the pond? And it's like, no, because
Hmm.
the pond's added to you, and you
Right.
stay you, and everybody stays everybody who they are, but everything else is added to you. So that has come back to me over and over. I saw a lot of things there. I saw a place that was like a garden, and this is kind of a contemplative place. And I was with the guides there, and at that point, I started questioning a little bit. I didn't really remember my life here. I didn't know anybody that had passed yet in this life, so I wasn't looking for anyone. But I did at one point ask, am I dead? Like, is this heaven? And she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I didn't really think heaven would even be this good. And, and she said, well,
Wow.
what did you think it would be like? And I said, I don't know, like church. And she said, well, that probably wouldn't be heaven, would it?
Right.
Because she could read everything I was thinking. And I thought, well, that makes sense, and this is better than church. So yeah, I guess this is heaven. And at one point, they did say that it was Earth's heaven. Um, so I mean that it's not like the ultimate heaven. Like she kind of said, well, this is like Earth's heaven, and
Hmm.
it's like, okay, well, that's really nice. And yeah, so I did question a couple of things. And at one point, I did say one of the first questions I said was, there's nothing really like bad here, is there? And she said, she was confused at first, and she goes, oh, you mean like negativity? She goes, no, there's no negativity here. And when
Mm.
she said that, it was like, oh, I don't want to, I'm home. I don't want to go
Yeah,
back, you
absolutely.
know, because that difference was so, even at my young age, being here on earth in this density was like night and day. It was like when you didn't feel any negativity, it was a whole different ball game.
Right.
So yeah, it was like, no, this is nice. Um, they took me to see a place that was like a school. People were wandering around, kind of like a campus or something, and they could listen to talks and teachers talking. You could learn whatever you wanted to learn. There was like a place you could walk through. It was like a library, and I walked through this one hallway type thing. And when I come out, it was like I absorbed all the information that was in everything that was there. And then I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I know everything. And then as I thought about it more and more, it seemed like it went away. I wasn't allowed to keep it. But for an instant, it was like I knew everything that was in all the information that was in this building. It was very cool.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really neat, that part of it. I saw like buildings that were um, like Roman type pillars, kind of open to the air. Some had roofs on them, but they had pillars, and just beautiful type buildings that were there. Um, at one point, someone actually walked by, and I could hear her thoughts, and she said something to my guides like, "What's she doing here?" Like they knew who I was, and like, "What's she doing here?" Like, this is strange. And
Right.
they were like, "No, you have to go away because she can hear you." So I wasn't allowed to communicate with this person. And okay, so that was kind of strange. And then someone else came by, a female, and she said to me, she said, "There's someone really important that wants to talk to you, and it'll seem like a few minutes before he can be here with you." And then she kind of floated away, and I heard her thoughts saying, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I remember thinking, what's that mean? Like, what, why? What are you talking about?
Right.
So after what seemed like a few minutes, I saw this golden ball of light appear near me, and it just got bigger and brighter and bigger and brighter. And it got to be, I'd say, the size of a small room, like 10, 12 feet in diameter, pretty huge. And next thing you know, there was this beautiful being standing there, and he looked like a king. And he was beautiful. And he stood there, and I kind of like was like, well, the energy itself was just so intense. I'll never ever be able to forget that energy. Um, it was so intense. It was very magnetic and very strong, and I felt totally almost paralyzed from it because it was so intense. But it was good. It was love energy, that this beautiful magnetic love energy. And at one point, I remember standing near him, and there was like a little bench that he sat down on at one point. But before that, I did ask, who are you? And he said, still standing, he said, "I am Sanat Kumara." And he said his voice was so powerful and held so much vibration that it was like all of heaven literally shook like a small tremor when he said his name. "I am Sanat Kumara." And he said it 3 times because I was kind of clueless. I was Canadian little girl, and he says Sanat Kumara, and I'm like, it's not like Stephen or Dave or anything. It was like, what does that mean? That's not a name I'm used to hearing.
Right.
And he said it 3 times, and then he kind of gave up and knew I didn't understand. And he said, "I'm your father. I'm your heavenly father." And I was like, okay, that works.
Wow.
um, you know, so he sat on the bench, and I could kind of see into his face and his eyes, and he had the most beautiful blue eyes that were like, they look like liquid water. They like blue water. They were just so incredibly beautiful. And he had light blonde hair, and he had tan skin, like kind of like a Malibu type tan with the light hair and these blue eyes. And he was beautiful. And I remember thinking he's the most beautiful being I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy was so loving and beautiful. I remember thinking that if I could just stay here in this energy, that would be enough for eternity. Like that would be enough for me to just
Wow.
exist in this energy, because that's all I could ever want. And then he started communicating to me in my mind, and I remember thinking that I don't know, can I feel like all this love and still understand what you're saying at the same time? It was like almost overload for me. And so we had a small conversation, and he basically said that, your mission will be successful. He said it won't always be easy for you, but you will have help along the way. And so that was the gist of his message for me, which was very comforting, even though I had no idea really what he was talking about. Like,
Right. I was thinking, you're probably thinking,
your mission will be successful. I'm like,
you're like, I've already
okay,
moved on from
whatever you
that, so I don't know what you're talking about this time. Right. Right.
exactly. It was like, okay, whatever you say. I don't know what it means, but I'm just gonna go with that. And he was very loving and gentle, and the energy was just so beautiful. I didn't want to ever leave it, but he did stand up, and our little conversation was over. And he said, as he was leaving, he kind of said, well, he goes, I don't think you're going to remember this. You'll need a trigger. He said, your children will always be looked after. And then he kind of started to walk away. And I remember thinking, children, I guess I'm having children someday. I had again, no idea what he meant.
Right.
It didn't make sense. And then he actually, in his own thought mind, he said, I can't believe she has total amnesia.
Oh,
And
really?
I thought to myself, amnesia? What's amnesia? I had no idea what that meant either.
Mm-hmm.
So then he was gone and walked away. And then one of the last scenes I remember was I was standing after he left. I looked down, I was standing, and I was on this road that was like golden bricks. I was standing on this road of golden bricks, and I looked down and I thought, oh my gosh, this is bricks that are gold. And I remember one of them saying to me, oh, you can reach down and touch it if you want. So I did. And she said, yeah, it's pure gold. And I was like, cool, this is cool.
Wow.
And then I looked up and I saw in the distance the most beautiful castle. And it had turrets on it, and it had gold. It looked like gold caps on the turrets, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And it looked about maybe half a mile away or something like that. It was in the distance, but I could see it clearly. And I was like, I want to go there. I have to go there. This is home. I want to go there. And that's when one of them said to me, well, that's only for people that stay. And I remember
Oh,
when she
okay.
said that, I was like, what? It just went through me with the meaning of that. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, it's almost time to go back. And I remember going, no, I don't want to go back.
Right.
And then I felt their direction, that was like them being told, well, we'll have to convince you to go back, because I had to be the one to say yes and no. And so they showed me this bubble, and this bubble appeared, and I was looking into it like a TV sort of, and they were showing me my mom over in my hospital bed, and she's crying, and then all of a sudden I felt her grief. It was just so strong, and I'm like, but why is she crying? Like, I'm right here. What's going on? And they said, well, if you stay here, she will have to go the rest of her life without you. And so instantly I thought, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that to her, because I could feel it so powerfully.
Mm.
And so I thought, okay, so I guess I have to go back. So I wasn't real happy with that. Um, it's almost like when they said that I had to go back, it's almost like all of the negative things that would happen to have to grow up here and go through all of the life here. I mean, of course, there's many positive things as well, but it was like all the hardships that I would have to go through kind of hit me with that energy, and it was, oh, do I have to? Do I
Right.
have to go back?
Yeah.
But that really cinched it for me, because I just couldn't do that. I didn't want to be the cause of that kind of pain. So I came back, and it was funny, because I did meet someone who, just before I left, she came and said hi to me, and she said she was my sister there or somehow, and she said, they let me come and just say hi to you quickly. And she goes, we don't have much time. You have to go. And she says, but I just came to tell you that I am coming to Earth soon, and that I will meet you at some point in your life later on. And I was
Mm.
like, okay. But at that point, I was still jealous, going, yeah, but you get to stay now and I have to go home.
Right. Right.
So, so we said, hello and goodbye kind of thing. And then next thing I know, I was back in the hospital bed, and my mom was crying. She was right there crying over it when I woke up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of, oh, yeah, this is right where I left off, what I saw in the bubble. And she started, she was still crying. And I remember thinking, but I came back, so we don't need to cry. And then she said, um, I could literally feel I had hemorrhage from my throat bleeding. And that's why I guess I had the experience. But she said, oh, I think it's starting to bleed again. And I started feeling the blood and I was laying down, so it was really hard, and it started bleeding pretty good, and I started choking and swallowing as much as I could and choking, and I couldn't talk anymore. And she just kind of said, well, she called the doctors, and they came in, and they literally took my bed and they wheels, and they took it running down the hall to put me back asleep or do whatever they needed to do to stop the bleeding, put more packing in or something. And I woke up probably a day later, and I was in an oxygen tent in the hospital. And but I knew, like, when they took me away, she kind of said, well, don't be afraid. I remember thinking, afraid of what? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
I remember, yeah, I mean, I literally thought to myself, there's this place, and then there's the other place, and honestly, the other place was way better, so
Right.
don't worry about it.
And yet they have
But
no idea, right? They're just telling you, don't be
they do.
afraid, something's gonna happen to
Yeah.
you. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
you,
I did
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
know that it was better,
Hmm.
but I also knew that I had chosen to come back, and that was like final. I knew that was final, that I wasn't going to go anywhere because I had chosen to come back.
Hmm.
That was almost impossible for me to grasp.
Right. Okay. Wow. Let's chat. So
Okay,
so
yeah.
so first of all, I always, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. You've done it before. I understand that, but I do appreciate
Hmm.
you telling me. We were strangers before we met today, so um, telling me your story, that it means a lot. Uh,
Thank you.
I do feel like these are personal things to people, and I just always like to appreciate you just sharing the story. I'm gonna say, I don't know how many I've done of these now. Maybe I'm in 40 episodes in, 30 episodes in. Not a ton really, considering some podcasts. Um, and yours is one of the most in depth that I've heard yet. And you've retained a large amount of memory, which is remarkable.
Well, I do have to explain that a little bit because
Yeah.
remember he said he gave me that trigger. He said you might not remember this.
Yes.
When I came back, I did remember a little bit, and I kept trying to tell my parents and my grandmother, and like just while I was still in the hospital for a few days. And it seemed like they didn't understand. And my mom said, well, what are you talking about? You've been here for 3 days. You had your tonsils out. And I'm like, well, that made sense to me as well. So I was like, kind of, yeah, what am I talking about? But I was trying to remember. I kept saying, but I was in the other place. And it seemed to upset my mother a little bit. My grandmother wanted more information. And then suddenly it seemed like the more I tried to remember, I could almost feel it being pulled away from my memory. The
Wow.
harder I tried, the more it got pulled away. And then I just got distracted and I let it go and didn't talk about it too much. And for I always knew something happened. I mean, my guide started talking to me when I was young too. Once I got out of the hospital, he started talking to me, which I didn't know was really strange for a while until I figured that out. But um, the weird thing was that I always knew. And when I was about 12 years old, my grandfather had a book about near death experience. Like he was an avid reader. And when I went there at that age, he had this book and he said, I think you had one when you had your tonsils out. And I remember thinking, you know what? I remember trying to tell everybody something about it.
Hmm.
And I said, why don't I remember? And I asked my grandmother, who was also very psychic, who didn't, of course, back then tell anybody about it. She said, because it'd be too hard to grow up here remembering everything. And it was like, oh my God, you're right.
Absolutely.
it it
Absolutely.
would I
With
knew
how
that was
beautiful
the
it
correct
was.
answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that was the correct answer. And
Hmm.
she said, you probably will remember it when you're older. And she was right. I started, once I got to be about 30, my mom passed when I was 34. And that put me on a quest to just get more involved in my things because my children at that point, I had 3 children, and they were older then. And it was like kind of like, oh, this is kind of my time now. You guys are all in school, busy and doing whatever. And so I started doing writing, joined a writers group. I eventually joined a psychic development group. And finally, for like the first time in my life, I thought, oh my God, there's other people out there. I'm not the only person, I can talk to somebody. Because when I had tried with other people throughout my life, it was astounding how fast they would change the subject.
Hmm.
And be like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess I'm done with that. Um,
Right.
so I just felt kind of alone in that
Yeah,
whole.
it's a discomfort for some people, especially when you're questioning their
Yeah,
beliefs or questioning, and I understand that. I have empathy for that
yeah,
too, because we're all on our own journey, so I get it. And I totally understand it. But you're
yeah.
right. I can see how it happens because and then when you get that pushback, you're like, all right. I had the same thing with kind of my spiritual type feelings and experiences growing up. If I said the wrong thing, I'd get the look and I'd say, okay,
Yeah,
uh, this isn't resonating. So I'd move on and I would just
yeah.
so it started to kind of unwind and your memories started to come back
It
of the
did. It
experience.
did.
Okay.
So at that point, I was like in my later 30s, and that's when I found the group. And, the lady I worked with, I did a reading with her, and I'd been taking her class for a while. And she said to me during the reading at one point, she said, I'm not sure why I'm supposed to say this, but she said, your children will always be looked after. And it was just like, wham. I
Wow.
just literally felt this thing go off in my head, and I was like, oh my God, it all came back to me. I had remembered almost everything, but I didn't remember meeting Sanat Kumara.
Right.
And that was the part that came back when she said those words. And I was like, oh my God. And then she said to me, she goes, she knew I had the near death experience. And she said to me, well, who did you meet when you were
Hmm.
there? And she said, was it Jesus? I'm like, no, because no, it wasn't him. I said, God, like our Heavenly Father, God, that's who I met. And so I wasn't sure of the name. I couldn't remember to say the name, but I started looking up after that reading. I started looking up Ascended Masters. And of course, there he was. There's his picture. There's his name. I'm like, oh, this is it. This is him. This is exactly what he looked like. And so, yeah,
And
I
that
mean, it
and
was a
that
real
name has
revelation.
that name has come up before. Like this was a name that you recognized.
Yeah, when I saw it written there and I saw his picture, it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is what he said that I wasn't getting when I was young.
Right.
And this is him, this is his picture, this is exactly what he looked like. But it was such a wonderful moment for me to go, oh, yeah, this is all makes sense now. It's all come back to me. And
Right.
it felt like my whole story was complete now, you know. And
So
it's funny because a lot of people don't know his name, right? Do you know?
mhm.
Have you heard his name before?
That was the first time I've heard that. So I didn't. And I hear all kinds of different things. It's the same thing with Jesus and Joshua, I believe I've heard. I get different things people tell me. I'm at a point now where I'm not sure um if everything if humans can understand names and identities the same way, meaning like
Yeah.
meaning that's like the name, but could there be a different name for someone else? Like I don't know. I don't really understand that
Yeah.
part.
Well, because we have earth identities and then we have spiritual identities, and they're all the same soul lineage, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I mean, ultimately, we're all one, but we do have our kind of like I look at it as the sun. There's the sun, and then there's all the rays that are all the sun too, but they
Right.
all have their own light journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all go back to be one, but they all have their own kind of lineage. And Sennacherib was mentioned in the Bible. He basically, when he said, I am your father, your heavenly father. So when Jesus actually said the Our Father prayer, that's who he's talking about. He's talking about Sennacherib. And actually, Jesus' name, spirit name is Sananda. Have you ever heard of him called Sananda?
No, I haven't.
So Jesus' spirit name is Sananda Kumara. So they are
Okay.
like related there in the other realms.
Wow.
And yeah, I know it kind of boggles my mind. It's like, because so many people haven't heard the name or studied him as the ascended master, but yet how many know the Our Father? That's who you're praying to. When you say the
Right.
Our Father, that you're talking about Sennacherib. He's mentioned in the Bible in, I think it's Daniel, as the Ancient of Days is one of
Okay.
his names. Master Venus. He is from Venus. Jesus said he is from the morning star, which is Venus.
Wow.
And Sennacherib is known as Master Venus or the Ancient of Days, our Heavenly Father, and the regent logos of the world, of which is Earth. And in his story, he came to Earth for 50,000 years when Earth needed help from the darkness to hold the threefold flame for the Earth so that it wouldn't perish in darkness. So he put his energy as the logos of the Earth, which I believe Gautama Buddha took over in the 1950s, took over Sennacherib's position as the logos of Earth, and he went back to Venus at that point. But he was here for 50,000 years holding that threefold flame light for humanity so that we wouldn't perish from the earth. And his promise to the earth was that there would always be enough light sent to the earth through beings that volunteered to come here so that the earth wouldn't perish and that it wouldn't be lost into darkness. So the 144,000 volunteers that are mentioned many times, there were a large group of 144,000 that did come mostly from Venus. When he volunteered to come to the Earth, they wouldn't let him go alone, and it was a show of solidarity that they would come with him, that he wouldn't be down here alone in the darkness. That the 144,000 are still here to this day after 25, 50,000 years. It's taken that long to raise the vibration enough for the entire earth to be risen out of the darkness.
And you're referring to reincarnation, I'm assuming then.
Yeah, yeah, we've
Right?
been
Because
here
if
a
we've been
long
there that
time.
long,
Yeah,
if the
for sure.
144,000 have been here that
Yeah,
long, they've been reincarnated in different
yeah.
souls. So see, this is the interesting thing about the work that I've been doing is you speak with someone and you get off, you get off the conversation with them and you go, okay, this is a lot of information. And you think, okay, I've got it figured out now. And then you speak to someone else, you go, oh, I haven't even scratched the surface. There's more, and there's more, and there's more.
There's
And
always more.
there's
Yeah,
always more. And then, you talked about your experience, how you were in the library. I've heard this library or hall of records, some people have referred to
yeah,
in their experiences where there's so much information. Yours was really interesting in the fact that you were walking through and indulging in the information, getting the information. It was downloading, you were getting it all and you were learning, and then it would disappear. Maybe because you were just temporarily visiting, you weren't a full-time resident. So you weren't
yeah.
able to take in all that knowledge. I don't know, but it's just from an outside perspective, listening to your experience, it's fascinating because, and the other thing I want to say, because it did take you so long to retain the memory, does when it came back to you, does the memory feel like a memory you would have of any other event in your life? Does it feel that real? Does it feel as real as,
Oh,
say, oh, I remember going
absolutely.
to a store last weekend? Like, does it feel like a memory like that? Like it's a real memory, or does it feel like dreamlike?
I think at first it was a little more dreamlike, and it seemed like I was remembering kind of from the end of it going back more to the beginning, sort of. Um, but it was very real. I mean, when I was there, I remember telling these beings, it feels more real here than it does in this lifetime, than it does here on Earth. it felt more real, like I had just woken up there, and this is a
Right.
dream, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what it seemed like to me, and it was so amazing that I realized even when I was, remembering in my 40s what happened, I realized it never left me. My subconscious mind knew this my entire life. It was
Mm.
never gone. It was just not on the surface. I wasn't accessing it, but it was always there when I needed it. When I was young, like my guide came and talked to me like soon as I was home from the hospital, basically, and started talking to me. And I knew it seemed odd even then a little bit, but I don't know what's going on in other people's heads.
Right.
But at one point, he came to me the time I first remember him. I was in the kitchen with my mom. She was making lunch. And all of a sudden, I felt the presence beside me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel his presence. And he's like, "Hello, I just came to say hi. I'm your guide," and introduce myself. And I could hear it all in my head. And I thought, hmm, can my mom hear you? And he said, "No, I'm glad you asked. You're the only one that can hear me." And then he said, "Well," he said, "see that knife on the counter?" He goes, "It's going to fall on the floor in a minute." I was watching and waiting, and it fell on the floor, got knocked on the floor. And I remember thinking, that's weird. Am I like supposed to know that before it happens? Like it seemed
Mm.
even weird for a 4-year-old to figure that out. And so that's how it started. And I remember thinking, I asked him, "Are you like from God?" And he said, "Oh, I'm so happy you asked me that. I'm so proud of you." He said, "Yes." And I said, "Is everything you tell me true?" Because that was true. So I did test him once too about something. And he said, "To the best of my ability, everything I tell you is true."
And you were
So,
4 years old at that time?
yep, I
Was
was
that
4 years
after
old.
the event? Was that after the NDE?
Yes, that
Do
was
you, so you
probably within a month of getting home.
did those
Yeah.
memories come back to you, or did you actually recall that in your life memory?
Oh, I recalled that. Yes, I did recall all of
So
that.
you had a spiritual
Yeah,
experience thinking that that was, I mean, I've said this before, when people have them when they're really young, that's all we know. So to you, this could just be a normal
exactly.
experience, like, oh, I'm sure my
Yeah,
my best friend down the street's having talking to her spirit guides too. You don't know the
yeah,
difference. It's like when people question that and they say, "Oh, how did they?" Well, that's probably what it is that you just felt like that was normal and it was to you.
it
And then
was.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then your memories come back later on. So yeah, no, very remarkable. One thing I wanted to point out that was really interesting you said is was when you were in the earth heaven, what we call it, which really raises a very wide question of what that means, because does that mean there's different heavens? That I understand there's layers and all these different things I talk to people about. But that's an interesting way that you said that. But you mentioned the water, and you mentioned how the water kind of splashed outward, and it was
Hmm.
one speck of, but it had its own individuality and back into the thing that's always gotten me when I hear about we are all one is a fear comes over me. And again, it's based off ego and human existence. And the fear is, oh my goodness, like I want my individuality. Like, what do you mean I'm one? You mean if
Right.
once I die, I just get sucked into this thing and I'm just part of something else and Joe's gone, like the part, whoever I am is gone. And the way that
Yeah,
you explained it is you're neither gone or not part. You are part of something bigger, but your individuality remains. And that's very difficult to understand as a human
it is.
because I'm my individual here and you're you, and we're not
Right.
one right now. Like we are, but from a physical place
Exactly.
we're not. So that has been something I've always questioned, like, what does that mean? And should I be fearful of that? And you're saying it's not a fearful,
No.
it's not something to fear. It's a beautiful thing, and that you still
When
have
when you
something to
do
love.
get a deeper understanding, you realize there's never anything ever to fear because there's nothing but you. There's
Okay.
nothing but you, you know. There's just nothing to fear but fear itself, because fear is a slippery slope. It pulls you down into low energy. And, I think are you familiar with Bashar,
No, I'm not.
the channeler named Bashar
I've heard the
Daranka?
name, but I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Well, he's amazing. I found him probably about 10 years ago. And to this day, it's amazing because it's like I have known all the stuff he's talked about even before 10 years ago. I've known it all. And he says everything, and everything he says, I completely resonate with. Everything he's ever come out with about the timelines, about how things work. And, he says that, you know, the more you go into the unknown, the more you find yourself, the more of
Mm.
yourself you find, because there is nothing else. So it's always hit me in different layers, trying to always understand, but there's always been that great recognition that we're all at once. We're all one, but we're all at the same time. The one and the all are the same thing. There
Mm.
is only God, and everything is made of God, and nothing. And people say, well, what is God? Well, what isn't God? That's the better question, because to me, there's nothing that isn't God. So there's God and there's nothing, and nothing doesn't exist because it's nothing.
Right. And the other thing you said that I hear a lot of is that it's more real there than here, that there's a feeling of it being more real there. And
Yeah,
I don't I
it
that
is.
part I've tried to break apart a little bit. Some people will say, well, it's still real here, but it's a different kind of real. It's at a
Yeah,
different level.
everything's real. Everything's real, and everything's not real, because anything other than being the one God that knows all and is all at the same time
Mhm.
is other, and other is an illusion. So everything that seems like other than God is illusion. But since it's all illusion, it's all real.
Mhm.
It's all part of the God's um, thought process. So, somebody's dreams, somebody's reality, everybody's on their own reality. I look at it as everybody's bubble is their reality. We have, from the time we're born to the time we pass in this life, that energy is like a bubble, a timeline that is just for you. And your version of everything is your version, and my version of everything is my version. And for this time we're communicating, our bubbles are overlapping.
Wow.
We're at the same time in the same moment communicating. But once we leave here, I'm back in my bubble, you're back in your bubble.
Wow. I
And
really
so
like
to me,
that.
it's like that flower of life design where the bubbles
Mhm.
all overlap for a while, you know.
Right.
And I've had so many strange experiences in my life. I have a blog where I've written about a lot of them, other than my near death experience too. um, and one of them was where I was actually at my son's ball game, my youngest son, when he was about probably 10 years old. And all of a sudden, I was seeing something in the distance where some kid was like kicking him or hurting him. And I was far away. I couldn't anywhere imagine to get there in time to change much what was going on. And I just got so agitated. And all of a sudden, I felt myself out of my body. I was literally out of my body, but everything froze. Like, have you ever, well, you probably don't know the show Bewitched, but she's done it a few times where she would just stop time, and literally everyone in this ballpark was frozen, exactly where they were and what they were doing, like motionless, like statues, the cars on the street, absolutely everything. And it was like, okay, you can do this, you can do this, and you can do that. And I could feel the energy around me, like guidance was telling me, do this or this, choose one of them. And I could see this sparkly light around me. It was sparkly. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, well, I choose this. And then boom, I was back. And when I come back, all of a sudden, it was like a movie starting up. It was like everybody slowly went back into motion. It was the freakiest thing I've ever experienced to this
Wow.
day. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm the only one in my movie that's
Mhm.
not a hologram or whatever you want to call it. This is my movie, and I'm in control of my movie. I'm creating my movie. And I pulled myself out of time, decided what I needed to do, and came back in time. And then everybody else came back, and I'm like, oh my God, they didn't experience being frozen for, 20 seconds or whatever it was.
Right.
It was
I,
just my
I,
experience.
yeah, and I'm going to confirm to the listeners listening. I'm sure I get different lists, but I love the audience that's been following the Soul Inspired, but there's going to be people who come in just curiosity and think we're all a little bit out there. And
Yeah.
I'm going to say I don't want to quote who this individual person is, but he's a spiritual teacher that I followed, I listened to about manifestation and things like that. And he was in a restaurant, and that
Right.
happened in the restaurant
Yeah.
where everyone froze while they were
Yep.
eating, and everybody was frozen and he wasn't. And he went, well, this is odd. Why am I still moving and no one else is moving? And then he had like these different thoughts of why it might have happened and why he should have done this, or and then he came to the conclusion like, oh, it's okay, I'm good with whatever's going to happen next. And then he said there was like this slow, like, okay, it's back in, and then motion was moving again.
Yes.
Exactly the way you
Yes.
just explained it. So now I've heard two people in my life, and you don't even know who I'm talking about
No, I
because we
don't.
don't know each other. So that right there, to me, from my personal experience, gives me clarity that that can exist. And if that can
Yes.
exist, then more things can exist, right? We are
You know what? Absolutely everything that you can think possible exists, or you couldn't even think it.
right. Yeah, that's incredible. So that
Yeah.
would be like an out of body experience, because you mentioned you'd had a few out of body experiences. Were you out of the body when you saw it, or were you just everything
It
paused and you were
seemed
still?
like I was, yeah, it kind of seemed like I was out. At least my consciousness was out, and I could see the sparkly air around me.
Mm-hmm.
And, or maybe I was frozen too, and I just felt like my consciousness was out, but I could see the
Right.
sparkles. I could feel the guidance. You can do A, B, or C kind of thing. And when I chose one, I came back. And it
Right.
was the most bizarre thing I'd ever gone through. And to this day, I've only spoken to one other person that I knew in spiritual circles that had gone through an exact thing. And he said, you know what? He goes, I had to make a decision too during the frozen time.
Right.
And yeah, so that was interesting. And I've read a book, I think it was by P.H. Atwater. She had a book where she talks about the same experience. She had 3 near-death experiences, and she wrote about her experience of stopping time and being pulled out of time. But what her story was fascinating was she would literally everything would freeze, and she saw the sparkling energy as well. But she literally lived like 6 months of her life before she came back, and she would do it in advance and come back and have to relive the whole thing
Oh
again,
my
knowing
goodness.
exactly what was going to happen. I know, how strange is that?
Wow. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is. I've always questioned that when people tell me they have their when they pass and they have that, what do you call it? The where you see your whole life,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you call that, but the life
A review
review, a
of
life
some kind.
review. And sometimes they'll say, and it was as if I was reliving it. I was back,
Yeah.
playing
Yeah.
baseball when I was 7 years old, and I was there, and I'm like, you had to relive, like you were, and it felt like that's why when they say they come back, it felt like they were gone 30 years, and they come back and they'd only passed away for 20 minutes, and it felt like they were gone 30 years. Some people can't
but it
really.
would but it would be like I said, there's no time, so I didn't have
Right.
much at force, so I was getting all my past lives coming to me in my memory. And I felt like I said, I felt like it was me, and all the scenes I was seeing, it felt like I was in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
and
That
and
was
that's why he said, well, you're all of it, you're all of them.
Okay, so that was one of the questions I had written down. So those people you had
Yeah.
seen, it was clarified to you that those you have been those people or future people, or you said it was past lives. So they were
Hmm.
different people you've been in your past. They were
Yeah.
all you, just different at different times. Did they look like they were from different times?
Oh yeah, they were male and female and different. But that's the thing. I was, seeing it all so fast and experiencing it so fast that I remember. That's why I questioned, who am I?
Right.
Who am I? And I heard,
Yeah.
well, you're all of them. I was like, oh, okay.
And as you were
That
learning all
explains why I
this,
feel like all of them.
right, right. And as you're learning all this in getting closer into your spiritual growth, you then move into your work, which is your intuitive, being an intuitive guide. And I think you mentioned that you have helped people with past life regressions, things like that. Is that
Mhm.
what interested you in that? That when once you understood things, like what got you into that interest of then moving into the
Yeah.
work side of it?
Well, like I said, from the early age, I always had, you know, the intuitive stuff happening to me all the time. I started telling my mom things when I was young, and it didn't go as I'd hoped it would go. At one point, I scared her a bit. And so I started feeling like, oh, maybe this is weird. Maybe I shouldn't do this. So I kind of just put it down somewhere and I didn't talk about it. It still happened all the time. I just didn't share it as much. And even over the years, when I got older a little bit, sometimes I would say something and usually get ignored, or sometimes I didn't say something and it would happen and think, well, should I have told them? And I'm like, no, it probably wouldn't change anything.
Right.
So I just didn't talk about it too much. It was kind of a thing. Yeah, but there was like in my book, I wrote about all the things that happened. When I was young, we moved to a century home, and there was a ghost in the house of a girl, and eventually she showed herself to me, and um, actually, it was my grandmother that came to the house and actually crossed her over to the other side, and she told me, she said, "Well, she won't bother you anymore." And I'm like, "Well, where did she go?" "Oh, she went home." I'm like, "Well, where does she live?" "Oh, it's far away." Like, don't worry about it, kind of thing.
Right.
It's like, okay. And at that point, I was kind of like, well, I kind of not sure if I wanted her to go, and never come back, but apparently that's where she belonged. So,
Right.
um, yeah, so I didn't really figure what she had done until I was older and started taking the psychic development class and working with spirit myself and getting back in touch with my guides and you know, who I used to be. I just remember thinking it was so easy when I was a kid. And I had to
Right.
struggle and meditate and work at it to be an adult and get this ability back.
I think that that's what happens a lot. I think that when you're a child, like
Yeah.
when I was a child, I've spoke to people, I've said it on podcast episodes that I used to feel people's energies. I do still feel people's energies. And when I was a child, I've never mentioned this on any of the episodes, and I will right now, is I used to close my eyes and see colors around people. I would think of people and I would see these colors
Nice.
show up, and I would tell my mother about it. And she would start, I believe she started reading some psychic books and saying, "Oh, like you're channeling something. There's something happening for you to be seeing this." And it was, I would talk about it like it was like eating. Like that would be part of my daily
Yeah.
routine. I'd go to bed, I'd think of people and I'd see colors and I would explain what these were and what they
Nice.
meant. But I did that naturally. And then as I got older and I started kind of thinking, oh, maybe I'm weird. Like, is that strange? And then because no one else would be talking about it. So I kind of would put it away. And so I know that that is in me. I know that is in
Oh,
me.
for sure.
And it seems
Well, I
like,
wrote I
yeah,
wrote a I wrote a bunch of songs, so I know that musicians channel most of the music they write.
yeah,
Those songs came to me with the music. The words came with the music, most of them, and it was just it was like they wouldn't leave me alone till I got it down,
right.
till I wrote it out.
Well,
And
that's a lot of that is
yeah,
intuition from for writers. My all the music
yeah,
I've written, it comes from somewhere. And I've always just
yeah,
let it flow through me. It sounds like you've done that. Can you show me that again? So you did a book and music. Would I be able to see what those are more about? Okay.
yeah. This is my CD. I don't know if you can see that.
And what's it called?
It's called Love Will Find a Way,
Oh, nice.
and I've
Okay.
got I've got 8 songs, and they're kind of like folk, spiritual, kind of
Oh, great.
ballad
I get
type
another,
songs.
I didn't realize you had actually written the songs and all that stuff. I got a fellow musician here. So, and,
Yeah,
and what's the book called?
my book is called There's Love: My Near-Death Experience and Beyond.
And do you go
So
even
as
more
I
in depth from what we talked
Oh,
about
for
today?
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I go in depth as I could go with the near death experience. And that takes about the whole first chapter, which I think is about 25 pages. But the rest of the book goes into the whole 50 years after that,
Right.
which I stuck to my spiritual journey. I didn't get into all the day-to-day stuff, a little bit of it, but not much, because I wanted to really just show people how the near-death experience affected me and my life. Because what it showed me was ultimately that we come in here to earth with a plan for our lives. We come in with so many things chosen ahead of time. Not every single thing, but a lot of it, all the major things. And we have a map within us. Like our higher self is there working with us, telling us, guiding us if we listen. And it's really hard to listen on earth because we've got parents and teachers and friends and everybody going, and you should do this and you should do that and you should do this and you should be this way and look this way and whatever. And it gets lost. And I tried, it took me till my 40s to go, wait a minute, I have to get back to that little girl that talked to her guide and was told all these awesome things. I need to get back to who I am. And, it took that long till my kids grew up and, God didn't need me as much that I could focus on me again. And so,
Right.
I just, once I started back on my path, I knew that I had to listen. I've always had to listen. When I get told something and I know it doesn't matter what people say. You can't deter me. You can't change my mind. And I've been tested with that in my book. One of the hardest things I went through was my divorce after 30 years of marriage almost. And I knew it sounded crazy to everybody else, but I knew what I had to do. There was no choice for me. And I lived long enough to know that if I don't listen, it doesn't go well for me if I don't listen.
Right.
So I just know I have to, no matter what. And I don't regret it at all because it's just the way things were. But I've also I've also got past life memories that some spontaneously came to me. Other ones, I took the course to be a hypnotist and took the past life regression course. And of course, we worked on each other for several days at a time, going through regressions. And I saw many there through that process. But after that first one, it made it so easy. And other ones, spontaneously, I remembered a lot of things. But what I've noticed is everything you remember in this life is something that pertains to this life. You're going to be shown things that help make sense of this life, that answer questions about this life and your relationships and your likes and dislikes and stuff like that help you on this journey. So everything I've been seeing and like I said, one of the most painful things was my divorce after that long. And I still love my ex and the father of my kids, but it was just gotten to the point where we'd grown apart so much. I'd spent about 5 years doing my thing. It wasn't his journey. But yet it was so painful to know I had to leave. And at that point I had met my husband now, who is my twin flame. And so we decided we would get together eventually at some point. And, I got divorced. And as I was going through that, I had to know. It was like, I have to know the real reason I'm going through all these things. And at some point, I saw a past life where I had been with my first husband, and it was a really old life, like a native type, seemed like Inuit or something. It was cold country, I remember. And I was a young girl. I wanted to be with David, who's my husband now, but I wasn't allowed to be with him because I had no control in that lifetime. It was just the men it was like almost like caveman type mentality. It was like, hey, they got to fight it out and they win the prize. Whoever wins gets me, kind of thing. And I had no say in the whole matter.
Right.
And so, David ended up getting cast out, and I don't know, I assume he died or left our village or whatever it was. And then I had to be with this person that did that, and I had no choice in it. And it kind of crushed me for a while. I remember feeling like I wanted to die for a while. And then I realized that, you know what? this person only did exactly what society and our group told him he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
He only did what he was brought up to do. He didn't understand what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't understand how it felt. He didn't understand what I understood. And I forgave him because I realized that I couldn't go on living and feel that horrible pain and anger and whatever it was. I just couldn't be that negative because that would kill me, I thought, in the end.
Right.
So I forgave him. And I realized eventually, he was a good provider. He did love me in his way, and he was a good provider, and we had a good life together after that happened. But it just was the fact that he took away my free will in that lifetime. So I literally saw us at one point when I was really going through this divorce going, I know this is not my choice in a way. Mm-hmm. I said I knew it was his choice, and I didn't understand why I knew that. And eventually I seen very clearly what I call the planning room. We were in this room. I was there. My ex was there. Our guides were there. They were showing us like views of what we were going through and choosing in our upcoming life, that we would be together, we'd be married, we'd have these children, we'd do all these things. And it was, you got to actually experience what you were seeing on this preview of your upcoming life and experience some of it. And so I saw all that. And at the very end of it, after we planned this pretty great life together, 3 great kids, a nice life, and then the one guide said to my ex, he said, well, you have the option here to take on some karma for this past life where he had taken away my free will. Wow. And I couldn't be with David. And, he thought about it for a bit. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I forgave you like 1,000 years ago. Like what? What are you even considering this for? Why would you end our marriage after this time to take on this karma that you don't need to, because I forgave you? Mm-hmm. But I don't know for sure if he forgave himself, which is the bigger question about that. I think he did. But you know what he ultimately said? He said, I think I want the challenge of it. And I remember going, right. What? You're kidding. After all these years together that are really great, you're going to make me go through all this because you want the challenge of it? Like, I was like the woman going, what? Right. And he was like, I guess the male ego going, oh, I want the challenge of it. Mm-hmm. And he knew, I think, it's going to be really great. I'm going to be the perfect husband, the perfect father, which he was. And I'm going to make her choose. After all that time, she's going to have to choose. Totally unfair. But what they didn't tell him at the time was that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I chose to stay, I was going to pass away before I was 50. And going through my divorce, I was about 46 and 47-ish. Yeah. So I knew, I could feel it. And I asked myself one day, I was meditating. I said to myself, is this what I'm supposed to do? My mother came through, who had passed away when I was 34. And she came to me and she said, if you don't leave, you'll end up just like me. And it just was like, oh my God. She wanted to leave for years, my father, and she never did. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't bring herself to do it. And it was just like lightning hitting me. And I was like, oh my God. She died at 54, breast cancer. And I could feel it. And when I asked myself, what is this horrible feeling? It was like part of me is dying. And that's why she passed, I realized, was that, what? We have all these chances to stay on our path and grow. Yeah. And if we don't take them for long enough, your soul goes, wait a minute, you're not growing here. It's time to go. Right. You're not moving forward.
I was just talking about exit points with another
Absolutely
person at NDE, so wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting how you explain that story while taking in your past life information. Do you do that kind of, I just always like to ask how people connect with you. Like, do you work with people one-on-one, or how do you?
I love to work on one-on-one. I have done some group ones before, but it's not as easy for them or me, really.
Right,
It does work. Some people get some good experiences from it, but it's much more fulfilling to do the one-on-one and be able to really help the person and know exactly where they're at and have the communication going while they're seeing what they're seeing. And
right.
I'm just guiding them to the next place they should look at, kind of thing.
Where do people connect with you? Like, is there a website or something they connect with, or how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can go to mysticmuseonline.com.
Mystic Muse dot, sorry, mysticmuseonline.com.
Yes, mysticmuseonline.com.
Okay. All right.
So
And
it's
I can always get that.
MUSE.
Yeah, I can get that link
Yeah,
from you as well. It's just I do find a
yeah,
lot of the listeners, they do find a lot of this fascinating, and it's good to get that information in case they want to work with with a guest, right? Because it sounds
right.
like you're working with. I had a past life regression one done one time, and I went through three different past lives, and it
Hmm.
was unbelievable. I was feminine, and I was a woman, a Greek woman in it. And it was funny every time they would bring me through an event and I would look at someone, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're this person in my life. Oh my gosh, you're this. And I would
Yeah,
see their eyes and I could see them in my current
right.
life, and it was an amazing experience. So I do encourage anybody that's fascinated with past life regression to give it a go, because it was I wonder now, if I this was years ago, I did about 10 years ago. I wonder now that I'm kind of adapting more to my spiritual self, if it would be more, if I would get more out of it, if I would understand it a bit better, because at the time I did it almost as an entertainment type thing, and it ended up
Hmm.
being kind of mind-blowing to me. So
But I bet you it answered a lot of questions about your life.
it did a lot.
Did it
Yeah,
answer?
there's been a
Yeah,
lot of things happen in my life the last 5 years, especially. So a lot of things have changed,
yeah,
and I can understand it better now than I did. So it really does
for
help your current
sure.
life big time. So
Absolutely. That's why I do it because I know that people only see things that will help them in some way. And I knew that there was stuff going on that I wasn't understanding with the divorce because it was so painful. And so, but yet I felt like I had no choice, which when I see the whole thing, I didn't really have any choice. And I even had a psychic that's very renowned in our area where I used to live. And I went to one of her talks one day, and she would give everyone a message after. And she said to me, she goes, "None of this is your fault." She goes, "None of this is your fault." And I'm like, "Okay, so so what's going on?" She goes, "Oh, you'll figure it out." And of course,
right,
I did eventually. But yeah, it really. I just knew there was a depth to it that I wasn't understanding until I saw those things. I just had to know. And it's
right,
amazing to me that, we have our life chart, but yet we forget it so completely to come here and experience things as new,
hmm,
because who wants to, the same old thing? Who wants to know it's the same thing you've done before? You
right,
want every experience to seem like it's a new experience. And it is, because it's a new moment. There's never the same now twice. It's always a new experience, and you want it to be a new experience. Um, so I've been told I have like over 450 lives on Earth,
wow.
and so that's pretty old, and I've retained a lot of skills and things from the past lives.
I don't know where you how you've been told that. I'm expecting through, your own guides or whatnot, or others that have guided you through it, but I've always felt that way. I've always felt like I've done this dance so many times.
Yeah,
It's just, it's in a strong, strong feeling within me.
yeah.
And I thought that as a kid
Oh,
too.
and you
Yeah.
have to trust that. I mean, you just know when you know, you know.
Right.
And, I've looked at people and met them for the first time and asked myself, so who do they feel like? I met this one girl at a function one time, and I thought, she feels like a daughter. She just feels like a daughter. I don't know why.
Right.
And eventually I did some regression work with her partner at the time, and she was there for it. And he talked about the daughter, and we looked at each other, and she goes, "That's me." I'm going, "Yep, that's you." I knew it instantly. And then he talked about his wife in the past life, and I'm like, "Oh, that's me."
Wow.
So it was the craziest thing ever. But it's like it's never been wrong when I've asked who someone is and I just sit with it for a minute, it's always correct. When I see it later on, it's always correct. If they feel
Wow.
like an ex-partner, an old ex-partner, if they feel like, a sibling or a parent, you have to just go
Yeah.
with that. you
No,
know.
that's remarkable. That's really interesting. I do want to ask one question I ask everybody. It's just
Mhm.
it's simple, but it's a strong question I ask all my guests. And the question just simply is, and what comes to your heart first is, why are we here?
We are mostly here for a new experience. We are here for the experience of being, because there is really nothing else. Being is all that is. And when we can have a new experience of it, that's kind of the ultimate thing.
That's
And
beautiful.
Earth is a huge, huge challenge.
Hmm.
Earth is such a challenge compared to all of the higher realms from Earth. This is like, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. This
Right.
this is where the challenge is in life. And I think people from other realms, there are souls that will never come here because they think, no, this is too much for me, I can't do this.
Hmm.
And so we're respected in other realms because we've been here. And once you get back there, it's like, when you can go this far into darkness, as some of the lifetimes on earth have been and what we've been through, and still love and still find love and still realize that life is good and still know that love is all there is, and stay focused on that, you've really accomplished something. You've accomplished something that you can't experience anywhere else.
That's beautiful. And to keep it, I'm going to do a little bonus question that I've never done, but to go in a positive direction with everything and seeing the difficulties of life. There might be people listening and feeling that in their life. What is one thing that you believe people could do daily to get in alignment with who they truly are and find
Mm.
kind of get in alignment with the best possible life path that they can move towards? Is there a daily practice you do? Do you recommend
Well,
anything
I
to
have
anyone?
started a mantra that Bashar teaches, and he taught that if you can go to sleep and wake up saying that I am who I am, and that is enough,
Oh, I
because it's
like
all
that.
about knowing that when you're in pure alignment, you are your true self. And when you're your true self, you love yourself as you are, you love yourself unconditionally. And when you do that, you're unblocking all the blockages that are taking you out of your own, getting you out of your own way. Because if we are our true selves, everything that is for us comes to us. He says, like, we think we have to attract things. Our vibration attracts everything we need at all times. And the only reason we don't get it is because we're blocking it ourselves. And being your true self and loving who that is takes those away.
Mm.
It's really simple. Everything's always really simpler than we make it out to be. Humans complicate everything.
Right. And like you
I've
said,
learned that.
we're here for the experience. And I've said I truly believe, people tuning in to these kind of shows and everything, we're looking for answers to questions we have about who we truly are. And it can feel scary and lonely and things like that. And I've always said, I truly believe we can live beautiful lives. We can have beautiful experiences in our lives. That's why we come here. We come here to
Absolutely.
experience, like you said, right? So to go
Yeah,
into that positive direction of who we are and to be like, well, we chose to come here. So how about we focus and look towards what can be beautiful in our life and go towards that? And
absolutely. Because we get so sidetracked with all the news and the crap that's going on. And, focus and energy putting into something is the currency of the universe. Whatever we focus on is what we're attracting. Whatever
right.
we're thinking about is what we're attracting. And children know this. Children know this. I learned this when I was young because sometimes my parents fought a lot. And when they fought a lot, it felt horrible. And so what did I do? I learned really young that I could just pick up a toy and go into my own world. I'd go in my own world and I would be playing, and At one
Mhm.
time, I remember literally stopping and hearing it come back into me and going, isn't there something I should do that I could help that fix that? And my guide was like, no, you just keep doing exactly what you're doing. I
Yeah,
was tuning it out. I
that's
was
it.
in my own wonderful world. And next thing I know, that went away. It would go away.
Absolutely.
And children do this instinctively. And what do? We teach them not to do it.
That's right. And so and that's why I think there's a lot of people out there that believe, people who are into manifestation and finding the beauty in your life and things like that. They talk a lot about when you get into those places, think of something that makes you smile. Think of something that makes you feel happy. You always say a beautiful baby,
Yeah.
not one that's crying and screaming, but one that brings you love or just a moment in your life that you can grab a hold of, because the longer you grab a hold of that moment, that other stuff
Yeah.
starts to kind of like fade, even though it could be serious
Yeah.
stuff, but like change your focus and it makes things a little bit
Absolutely.
easier. So I love that. And
Yeah.
yes, and I like how you explained how it is when you're a kid, because I think we can all relate to that, but we do change as we get
Yeah.
older, and we got to be careful we don't, like a magnet, just go
We
towards the
have to
negative.
know that there's always, no matter what bad, horrible thing we have gone through or are going through, that there's always this part of us inside our true being that you have to realize is untouchable.
Hmm.
It is, nobody can ever get to that essence or touch it unless you allow them in. And it's
Right.
like you have this part of you that is your true essence, that is yours, that nobody can get to. No matter if they kill you or no matter what they do to you, that is still you, and they can't have it. It's
Right.
just not available unless you let it go.
Yeah.
So,
I
it's
love that.
really important to know that you always have the ultimate choice and decision about what you do with that and what you focus on. Are you going to give up and give it away, or are you going to hold on to that because that's all there is? That's all there is being you.
Right. I love that. I'm gonna end our conversation on that. It's been really nice talking to you tonight, Deborah. I appreciate all your
Thank
insight and
you.
information on your near-death experience. I like to turn to the camera and also say, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave your comments. I love seeing everybody's
Yeah.
communication back and forth with each other. That's why I'm doing this. This is why Soul Inspired has been created, is to create a community of people who are looking to find further answers on their spiritual journey. So I appreciate everybody subscribing and sharing. And thanks again for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.